Welcome to the 8th Annual Arnold Star Lecture and Exhibition. Did everybody get something nice to eat out there before coming in? Perfect. It's kind of a cold evening. My name is Nancy Young, and I am your host this evening. I am the Senior Development Director for the Department of Neurology at the School of Medicine at UCI. And I work under the auspices of the UCI Foundation, which is a nonprofit entity created to raise funds for the worthwhile endeavors of UC Irvine. Things like scholarships, medical care, research, education, things like this public lecture. The Department of Neurology has hosted this event 7 times, but this is the first time that it's a collaboration with UCI Illuminations, which is the Chancellor's Arts and Cultural Initiative. So we're bringing together art, science, and the space between. So this lecture tonight is featuring our honored guest speaker, Mr. James Hubbell, in conversation with Dr. Arnold Star, with a special introduction by Dr. Steve Kramer and Mrs. Sandra Dykstra. Tonight's perspectives and images will amaze you as our speakers explore the inner workings of the mind and the similar yet different dynamics between creative and scientific discovery. So I hope you enjoy the show and know that your questions are welcome. It makes this lecture a true dialogue, just as scientific and creative discovery often are resulting from collaborative research and interactions. So to do that, we provided some cards outside to write down your questions. And at the end of the lecture, if we can say it then, just let one of us know if you have a question and you can write it down, or maybe, I guess, it's a small enough crowd, you could probably just give it to the speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our Interim Director of Neurology, who's also director of the ALS Neuromuscular Center at the UCI Medical Center, Dr. Tahseen Mozaffar. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a real pleasure to welcome all of you to the annual Starr Lecture. Some of you may have heard me speak about Arnie in the past, but it's a real pleasure to have known and have worked with Arnie. I wish that he had not stopped practicing when I joined in 2000, but I still saw some of his patients, and not only do I know of his scientific skill, but I also know of his clinical skills as well. Arnie is a legend at UCI and also in the neurology field. He grew up in New York, went to NYU for his medical school, and then trained at various places, including the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, as well as the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in London at Queen Square on that. And he was on faculty at Stanford when Stan Vandernoord, who was the division chief of neurology, invited him to come down and join UC Irvine in the early 70s. And Arnie became one of the founding chairs of the Department of Neurology. Now, Department of Neurology, from the time that Arnie started it and now, has grown tremendously. Currently, we are one of the larger departments in the school. Actually, currently we're the 3rd largest department as a school. But none of this would have been possible without the foundation work that Arnie Starr and Stan Vandernoord put in. And just to mention a few things, Arnie did things which were original in neurology. He was responsible for creating the first ever sleep center in this region. Sleep medicine was pioneered by neurology. So Arnie sort of recruited John Sasson, who created one of the first sleep centers in the country, an academic sleep center. He also recruited Ken Noodleman from McGill to start a neurophysiology laboratory here at UCI. And again, both of these were seminal moments in the development of neurology as a department in Orange County. But Arnie's contribution went beyond that. He really pioneered the concept and the practice of evoked potential, which is the electrical potentials that are given out by the neuronal cells, the brain cells, and especially in the field of auditory evoked potentials or hearing related spontaneous activity of the brain. He really pioneered this work. He's generally largely recognized as one of the founders in this field. And this has led to very important discoveries and work, and especially in newborn screening of hearing, where you can actually pick up these hearing loss very early and you can intervene, resulting in proper language development, etc. So Arnie is a legend, as I said, in the field. But Arnie has always been very connected to the art, to art as well as interaction with art and medicine. For the longest time, he ran a seminar series with Larry Sporty in psychiatry and talked about general sort of humanistic side of medicine and neurology as well. So I've learned a lot from Arnie. It's been a sheer pleasure, and I'm glad that the department recognizes him in this form, and we get to hear some really good talks about this. The speaker today, before Mr. Hubbell and Arnie start, is Dr. Steve Kramer, and Steve has been a member of the department for the last 15, 16 years. Really one of the stars in the department. No pun intended there with Arnold Star, but on that. But I mean, Steve is probably one of our best known neurologists in the world. He's really pioneered the area of neurorehabilitation, especially brain repair, both after strokes, but also after some spinal cord injuries. And his work deals with how to rehabilitate the brain, and he looks at factors that may be responsible for good outcomes versus outcomes as well. He's a brilliant speaker. He's invited all over the world for his talks, and it's my pleasure to ask him to come and say a few words as well.
The other way.
He doesn't need the stairs.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Mozafar. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for having me. So I was asked to talk about the neurology of creativity. I thought, well, I'd like to meet somebody who knows about that, because I don't know if I study creativity. So I thought, why would they ask me to do that? Well, it is true that I write poetry in the annual poetry anthology. You can't help but write poetry if you look at stuff. And I play music, I play guitar, and I play French horn sometimes in the university symphony. I like to do brain mapping, trying to figure out brain injury and how do we rewire the brain and how do we make the brain work better, and how do we give that kind of look. And we do look at brain function in relation to genetics and how different genes modulate the function of the brain. It's important stuff. And we do treatment. We do growth factors and drug therapy trials. And this is in reference to some stem cell work we did. And this is a trial we just finished of telehealth, where we put a computer in the home and have people play different games in order to rehabilitate movement and get them back. And it worked. We have a big study under review now. Maybe that's why they invited me. But I also started the stroke center here. UC Irvine was the first stroke center certified in the country when that became available. It was a 5-way tie, but we still get to say that. Despite many odds, we did it back in 2004. Started what I think is the most populated public-facing UCI institution. We get about 500 people a year, part of our stroke rehab network. This is our picnic where the patients come. We give them food. If you give them food, patients will come. And when we weren't getting enough people in for the stroke center, we had to change the laws in Orange County. So I personally led a county-wide effort to create the system. So if somebody calls 911, they're taken to a proper place. And we all put that together. And this is what the network looks like. And there's UCI on the stroke network. Okay, so I figure, all right, well, maybe that's why they invited me. So anyhow, there's that. So they want me to talk about creativity. So let's have a go at it. So first I went to the online dictionary, because who uses books anymore? And asked the question, what's the definition of creativity? And I like this one the best, the Oxford Dictionary. Creativity is the use of imagination or original ideas to create something, inventiveness. And that seemed like a satisfying definition, so let's hold that for now. And this is just me jamming now. Creativity can manifest in music, science, medicine, literature, art, cooking, social action, child rearing, gardening, sales. I was a door-to-door salesman, put myself through college. So creativity has many branches, many dendrils, right? Let's talk about creativity and the man we're here to honor tonight, amongst two. We'll talk about the other one in a moment. Arnie Starr is a very creative guy. He's a neurologist, which you have to be creative to be a neurologist. You know, you think about the heart, it just pumps. You think about the kidneys, just filters. But the brain is really a collection of hundreds of Balkan states, all crammed into one little box in the skull. So to be a neurologist, you got to be on your toes a lot, and that's what Arnie did. He's also an artist. You've seen some of his art out there. Here's some examples I was able to find. He founded the UCI Department of Neurology. That is not a small thing. It takes creativity to make big things that work and that renew themselves, that blossom. Anybody can plant a bulb, but for it to come back every spring, and I guess I'm the bulb in this example, but Arnie, thanks for planting me. And he also is a polyglot. Arnie speaks 7 languages, and I struggle with one. Here's one of my favorite Arnie quotes I was able to find. In response to the question, I have to think too hard to paint, he said, use a bigger brush, which is a response to be distinguished from Sheriff Martin Brody, who said, you need a bigger boat to creative solutions to 2 different problems. Let's look at some of Arnie's work ahead of getting to our artist guest tonight. So Arnie's still publishing this in Nature Reviews, which is not a shabby journal at all. Still publishing about auditory neuropathy, respectfully, and very recently. And creatively looks at how auditory processing relates to visual problems, because the ear bone is connected to the eye bone, and Artie creatively links those. Also looks at how hearing is related to features of dementia, very creatively connecting all the parts of the brain, and then looking at genetic aspects of different kinds of auditory nerve dysfunction. And then this is a classic paper in which he introduced a new syndrome, auditory neuropathy, understanding how problems with the nerve bundle that carries signals from the ear to the brain creates its own clinical syndrome to be identified and treated in its own distinct way. One thing we can admire about this particular avenue of Arnie creativity is that it's been cited 623 times. Now, how many of us have had an idea that 600 people later said, let me tell you about something I read lately, right? So that's pretty good in our business. It's pretty good in any business, I think. Arnie has been publishing since 1989 when I was an intern. Arnie has been publishing since 1964 when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. And if you're wondering, here's 1960s Arnie. Those cheeks, they go on for blocks. Okay, so let's get back to creativity. So I thought rather than try to explain creativity, since that's not what I think about most of the time, I would turn towards some experts. So let's look at the poet Maya Angelou, who tells us, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you get. Okay, I like that. Let's talk about David Ogilvy, sometimes called the father of modern advertising. If it doesn't sell, it isn't creative. Something to think about. Okay? Then you've got Pablo Picasso, the painter, who says, the chief enemy of creativity is good sense, right? The good is the enemy of the best. Okay? And then psychologist Erich Fromm, creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. And that's not easily done, is it? Not in a tenure track position. Leo Burnett, who brought us Tony the Tiger, the Pillsbury's Doughboy, right? He says, curiosity about life in all of its aspects is the secret of great creative people. So curiosity. And I think from our speaker tonight, Mr. Hubble, we're going to hear a great deal about curiosity. And then Maslow, the great developmental psychologist, almost all creativity requires purposeful play. Wouldn't it be neat if there was a required hour of purposeful play in our day, each day? Right now it's kind of subsumed by emails. And then Ray Bradbury, the great science fiction writer, don't think. Thinking is the enemy of creativity. And we're going to get to that because I'm going to talk about one piece of neurology at the end. We're going to do some psychiatry and then neurology, and I'll be done. But we're going to get back to the idea that thinking can be the enemy. Okay, and then Steve Jobs, perhaps one of the most famous inventors, creativity is just connecting things. And we're going to get back to connections in the brain as the way that creativity emerges. So Steve Jobs, once again, anticipating anything I have to say or do. Then Neil deGrasse Tyson, famed scientist, astronomer. Rational thoughts never drive people's creativity the way emotions do. And anybody who knows me knows that that's true. Ernest Becker, the cultural anthropologist, the road to creativity passes so close to the madhouse and often detours or ends there. And so this is a segue, because if you ask a person, sometimes off the cuff, they might say, well, creativity is related to madness, right? So let's chew on that for a moment. Let's look at a pro and a con with regards to the link between creativity and insanity. So people sometimes draw parallels between creativity and mental disorders. I don't like the term disorder. There are variations, and depending on context, it's ordered or disordered, depending on where you work. So there's bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, anxiety, ADHD. These have all been associated at various forms at various times with enhanced creativity, according to some authors. Now, there's a movie that came out about 15 years ago called Crumb that documents the Crumb Brothers. And I don't know if you're like me, I just love Robert Crumb's work. You've seen Fritz the Cat and this sort of thing. And he also had a brother named Charles Crumb, who was also an artist. Here's the Adventures of Long John Silver. Here's the Adventures of Robert Crumb. So Robert Crumb went on to draw Keep on Truckin'. You've seen that. There's so many things that have penetrated into popular culture. His brother, Charles Crumb, did not do as well and went on to draw just pages and pages of gibberish. And he went insane and took his own life. And in the movie, they really do a very good job of describing at least one of the border zones between creativity and insanity. It may not be all, but it's a movie worth seeing, and an example of possibly psychiatric aspects of creativity. Albert Rothenberg has done some studies, and he's pointed out, okay, on the one hand, both creativity and mental illness involve deviations from normative modes of thought. If you're creative, you're doing something different from everyone. If there's he calls it mental illness, still pejorative, but let's go with it. If there's mental illness, you're doing something different, so maybe there's some overlap. But he points out the following, that the list of mentally ill creators is dwarfed by the very large list of highly creative people who don't have mental illness. So it's not a requirement, it's not a sine qua non, but sometimes they are linked. So that's some psychiatry thoughts about creativity. Let's talk about neurology. So 2 examples, and then I'm done. So first, this is Albert Einstein's brain, which he did not want extracted and did not want studied. But I guess once you're on the autopsy table, your vote goes down. That's the way it went for Dr. Einstein. And so let me tell you a quick story about Franciscus Sylvius, who was a 17th century anatomist, who said, hey, you know, there's a big gulch here that separates the temporal lobe from the rest of the brain. So this is the gulch, this is the fissure of Sylvius. It's called the Sylvian Fissure, okay? And it normally goes about 3/4 of the way back. And that happens kind of early during development. Now in Einstein's brain, which is an actual picture of, that Sylvian fissure only goes about halfway back, okay? And so what happens is this area here, which if you're into details is known as the inferior parietal lobule, obviously. The inferior parietal lobule got to sink down below where it should have hit a wall called the Sylvian fissure. So Einstein's inferior parietal lobule is generally cited to be 15-20% larger than the average person's. He had language milestone delays. He didn't really talk till he was about 5 years old. But the normal job of the inferior parietal lobule, amongst other things, is to integrate all kinds of information coming in from all kinds of sources. And so one could point out that Einstein's brain was uniquely designed, turbocharged, to be creative and bring together lots of information, now with added computer booster power. So that's one neurologic reflection on creativity. Here's the other one. This was a study by Beatty et al. And what they did was they did functional MRI of creativity. They put people in an MRI scanner and set the dials to look at where the brain lights up when the person is thinking or doing certain thoughts. And what they asked them to do for 2 minutes was to think of really uncommon alternate uses for, say, a box or for a rope. So, to wit, what's a common use for a rope? Hang an outlaw. All right, pull up on a horse thingy. I don't do horses. Tie some sticks together. That's low creativity, very valid uses, but what would be high creativity? So I came up with these. You could floss a whale, right? Or maybe use it as a mute in a flute, right? Something like that. So there's very unusual uses, and then there's common uses. And so they put people in there and scanned their brains, and when they were done, they asked them what they were thinking about, and they rated them. And so what you're going to see is, what does the brain look like when it turns on and comes up with some pretty common uses for rope, versus comes up with some very creative uses for rope. And there are some creative ones. So for the common use, for the low creative network, this is the bricklaying network. Pick up a brick, make the wall, right? You get the idea. It's the workhorses of the brain. It's the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, and the motor cortex. It's a lot of connections for usual bricklaying kinds of behaviors. But what does the brain look like amongst those people who were coming up with very creative uses for a box or a rope? It's a different set of networks, and it was 3 main areas. The connections were highest amongst creative people in, first, the default mode network, which is areas that connect to certain parts of the brain. It's what you do when you daydream. When you don't pull your iPhone out at the line in the bank, and you imagine, or you put yourself in someone else's shoes. And it's a very creative kind of area. But to be successful in creativity, it's not sufficient just to pump out ideas. A 5-year-old pumps out ideas. You have to go somewhere with it. So the second network that these people found were related to creativity is the Salience Network, which comes out of the limbic system down here. And what that means is that when you have these creative thoughts, you have to say, that's a keeper, that's dumb, right? You put some salience, some valence on it. But even that's not enough. It's not enough to come up with creative, clever ideas and to decide that they're good or bad. You then got to get some elbow grease and start saying, now we do go or not. So the third network is the executive network. This is the prefrontal part of the brain that distinguishes us from the beasts of the field. The executive network is what teaches us, helps us decide, what am I going to do and what am I not going to do? What am I going to do next? What's my plan today, right? And we've all met people who could use a little bit more executive network. Anyhow, we're here tonight to talk about and to meet Dr. Hubbell, James T. Hubbell, and he's going to talk to us about his experiences. Hopefully we'll hear about poetry and painting, jewelry, sculpting, some of his buildings, and his foundation, which is dedicated to art education and art in nature. And truly fulfilling the creativity requirements, James Hubbell has gone beyond creativity, beyond saying this is good or bad, and has created a foundation, is actually doing something with it. So I very much look forward to hearing his comments tonight. Thank you for your attention. Right here. Is that okay?
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. That was very fascinating. Well, our next speaker doesn't really need introduction since he's been introduced several times now. Dr. Arnold Star, who's emeritus professor, founder and first chair of neurology at UCI, came to UCI from Stanford at the invitation of Dean Stanley Vandenort, as Dr. Mozavar explained, and together they grew the department to a national and internationally recognized neurological research and clinical program. And to this day, Dr. Starr is invited to speak internationally on the subject of auditory neuropathy, of which he is a founder, as Dr. Mozavar mentioned before, but also to give master classes on his neurology-inspired watercolor paintings, Neuroscapes. Hopefully you saw some of them out there in the gallery. So I'd like to invite Dr. Starr up to explain a little bit about his inspiration to paint. And please give a warm welcome to Dr. Arnie Starr.
I don't have
you have some.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't have any slides. And then I had to whisper, yes, you do. So I should click on,
Are you ready?
yeah.
Did you want to say just a few things about what your inspiration for starting watercolor painting so many years ago?
Yes. Painting is a very personal force for me. And I started to paint when I was on the services of the hospital that were really boring and you had nothing to do. Like on the psychiatric ward, when I was on it, you just had to write an order, yes, you can restrain him, or no, you can't restrain him. And that was not a good time for me. And I think it's changed, and psychiatric services are now much more sympathetic to patients than they were in the old days.
So you were in Salerno, Italy, just last month. You want to talk about that for just a little bit?
Yeah, in Salerno, well...
The Biennale.
Yeah, the Biennale. I do a lot of painting, and every so often one of my Italian friends says you should submit that to the Biennale. It's a judgment of paintings that artists think are good, and you can win an award, and sometimes you get some money. Well, I was very successful. I got an award, but I got no money, and that's all right. But painting for me frees my mind from the confines of my body, and I can see things and use bright colors, and for me it's a major cause for my happiness.
So should we go ahead and do your slideshow? Because we do have a lovely one.
Yes, do the
Ready?
slideshow. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Do you want to have a seat here, or do you want to sit back?
I'll stay here. Oh. Yeah. This is when I travel. I have pens and I draw usually structures of the brain that I know. And colors are very important. These are anatomists make things very boring, and I like to use bright colors and change the emotion of the see, this is one of my favorite ones. This is the 8th nerve, and it has all these beautiful colors in it. And when the nerve gets sick, it has a neuropathy, and that was my entry into hearing. Those are big synapses called calyces of Held that control the cochlear nucleus, which is an auditory structure. And you know, when in science, I do most of my science at home with watercolors. I draw, and eventually I get to figure out what's going on and be able to write a paper. And I can repeat these paintings over the years, and they only change in color usually, and emphasis. some of the paintings don't make sense. I've done these over the years, and I don't know how they found them. That's a neuronal plate with tomatoes. And I have them talking to each other, the neurons. When you sketch, your mind goes blank and you come up with these unusual interpretations, and I think that's the way advance really is made in science. That's a guitar in the brain. Ten Commandments. These are my exciting neurons. They're orange.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thank you.
Watch your step there. Wow, that's all I can say. That music, by the way, was by Dr. Donatella Caramia from Salerno, Italy. She's a composer, neurologist, and musicologist. And she was here last year for the Starr lecture. So we were pleased to be able to play her music. And next, I would like to introduce someone that we invited all the way from Julian, California, tonight to introduce our honored guest speaker, James Hubble. The person is Sandra Dykstra. She's a literary agent, very well respected in the publishing world for her legendary representation of renowned authors Amy Tan and Lisa See, plus a host of other literary talents that I hope she'll perhaps mention tonight. Sandra Dykstra is also an art collector and longtime friend of James Hubble. So we invited her to introduce the magical creator himself by saying a few words about their friendship and the role of art and creativity in their lives. So again, please give a warm welcome to Mrs. Sandra Dykstra.
Well, how to follow Steve Kramer and Arnie A. Starr. And that wonderful montage of slides. Not easy, and certainly not easy to introduce James Hubble. Let me say that I am privileged to weekend in Julian. James Hubble and Anne Hubble are privileged to live there full time. Arnie lives across the valley as well, and we all get together and share pears, Arnie's pears. I just want to say that for me, coming back to UC Irvine, very special. I taught here in the 70s. I was in the Department of French Literature. They had me teaching poetry, and it was terrifying because, well, we won't go into it. But anyway, I don't recognize the campus. I've been able to figure out just 2 or 3 buildings that were here back then. But I'm here to talk not about me, but about James Hubble, and how to sum up a friendship of 2 decades, and how to describe the romantic dreamer artist, James Hubble, in words as opposed to images, and in just a few minutes. As evocative and elusive as his art, a genuine original is James Hubble, a Renaissance man who sweeps the viewer into the world of his imagination through so many different media and through the soul of and the heart of the man himself. James makes us see the world anew through his moody landscapes, his stained glass windows, his jewel-like stained glass windows, his swirling sculptures, his gleaming mosaics, his absolutely Gaudi-esque architecture and jewelry. A multimedia artist, James is and was before the term existed, because his talent finds so many ways to express itself. Bram Dijkstra, my husband, and I have been blessed to enjoy philosophical discussions with James about art. And I just want to pause and say that Anne and I talk politics, and James shuts us down, saying he only wants to talk about beauty and politics is ugly. And to collect his work, and to have been on the receiving end of an incredible array of hand-drawn cards for birthdays and anniversaries and thank you notes, each one memorable for its image as well as for James' humor and his big heart. From Connecticut originally, where he began his art training, James went to Cranbrook Academy in Michigan, where he became a multimedia artist, because that was what you did there. And then married the love of his life, Anne Stewart Hubbell, a teacher. They moved to Santa Isabel, a little village which you must visit in the mountains on the way to Julian, where they've lived for over 50 years now, spawning an art compound of, quote, cottages, which are really each of them Gaudi-esque sculptures in which James's mosaics, his stained glass, and his sculptures abound. No one expresses his vision better than James, through his art and through his words. Quote, "We need a romantic period. We can't own anything. We are only loaned things. Learn to fall in love with 80 billion galaxies." James has designed hundreds of commissions worldwide: glass, doors, sculpture, fountains, gardens, as you see in the gallery, peace parks in, I think, at least 6 peace parks worldwide. And in each of these cases, James believes he is a teacher who brings together students from around the world and teaches them. In the past decade, he's had 2 large-scale retrospectives at the Oceanside Museum of Art and at the Mingei, and he's been exhibited in Russia as well. If you go to Rancho La Puerta in Tecate, you will see James's fantastic stained glass. His property, which I've just been describing, whose buildings feature soaring roofs with sculptures, mermaids coming out of the roofs, with domes, with arches, all made of clay, curled metal, and again, stained glass, the showers, hand-cut mosaics. Inspired by natural shapes, James is an earthman. Shells, leaves, rocks, vines, trees, ocean waves, waterfalls, skies. And in nature, there are few straight lines. Every Father's Day, the Hubble compound is open to the public, and I urge you to try to go there one of these years to see this amazing, magical place, which is going to be a compound, an artist colony. It already is an artist colony, but it will be that in perpetuity, which is why the Ilan Leal Foundation exists, to make that a reality. So here are a few of James's words to give you some of the power of the poet in him. "Take this life, scatter it as a seed given to the winds, scattering joy and hope. There is life right now to live." An anti-materialist, a humanist, James recognizes that, quote, "To give of love or beauty is not always rewarding. Is not always rewarding in material ways. After all, birds do not get paid to sing. Through his life and work, James has shown us the way to beauty and the joy that comes from experiencing it. Let me also mention that there's an exhibition on right now at the Oceanside Museum of Art through February 3rd called James Hubble Seeking Balance, and it's well worth seeing. Thank you so much.
I think my life is really about maybe bridging things, but it's also just about making things.
Jim doesn't mimic nature, he doesn't copy nature, but he's informed by nature.
I think God is a great artist, and there are places in the world where I'm struck by that. I also think there's something divine inside of us. I think James Hubble responds to that beauty in nature with that treasure inside of him.
I don't think you have to know where you're going, but I think you have to set a direction towards something that hopefully it's big enough so it'll last your whole life and even after.
I think Sea Ranch is the building that people know Jim Hubble for. He's unconventional because he's just following his own path, and I think that makes him strong in his artistic vision.
There's healing peace in that art. There's healing power in that art. I think it's because he has such respect for the human and the divine, and for nature.
It's like Jim, it's both unassuming and powerful.
We love the chapel. We absolutely love it. I've been bringing my daughter since she was born here, and it just seems to feed her soul. It's so pure and beautiful and creative. So thank you for the gifts you give our world. Did you build things when you were young?
I couldn't spell, so I had to do something.
You can see the progression of an artist and a craftsman and an architect and a builder and a human.
When you start a job, you're looking for clues as to, this is almost like a mystery. What's this thing about? seemed easier to kind of get people to fall in love with the Pacific than to fall in love with the universe.
His idea of the Pearl of the Pacific, it would take 7 lifetimes to do what he can see.
The Pacific can hold us together in a non-political way, but just in a human way.
I think we have to celebrate individuals are different, that we're not all the same. We need each one of us to make it work.
Ilan Lael would not be were it not for the love between James and Anne, because it's their home. It's where their boys lived. And that rootedness in human love is probably what makes it sacred. That mundane human love, it's what can catapult us to the divine.
Hey, wow, again. So please join me in welcoming Mr. James T. Hubble. Go first. Oops. Okay, so that's see there, and then I'll bring So this is the part where we have our conversation. So if you have questions, just raise your hand, and we've got Gail in the back with cards if you want to write them down. But we'll start off with Dr. Kramer in conversation with Arnie Starr and Mr. Hubble.
Oh, they have mics?
Yes, they have mics.
You sure I'm turned on?
Can you hear him?
Can you hear me?
I'm really turned on.
Really?
Oh, sorry.
You see.
Okay,
Good.
thank you.
Good evening. It's a privilege to be here in the shadow of two creative forces. I wonder if we could just start off with some open-ended comments. Mr. Hubble, is there anything that you want to share or anything that you want to say to the audience just off the cuff?
Ask questions.
Okay, we'll get to that. Arnie, any?
Well, I think the term creativity is a wonderful word because we all don't know what it means, and it's something that it's something that overwhelms me when I'm doing something, and I know that it's creativity, but I didn't plan it. Does that happen to you, James? Or do you plan everything?
I'd rather go a different way.
Go a different way, yeah.
I wondered if all of you wondered why we call the talk between art and the space between art and science. And it's because all my life I've not been able to separate things the way other people do. I mean, I couldn't understand why you had a religious, spiritual thing and a physical thing. You need the earth to pray on. You need both of them. And I've gradually, I came to the conclusion that if there was such a thing as a definition between about beauty, it was from the pathos, which we all have within us. There's things that are sad, and there's things that are really good. And, like friends and having a cup of coffee with someone. And it's when the two things come together, and they make both of them more richer and more important. And like the show that I'm having at Oceanside, it's really about celebrating my life. There's all of these materials. There's even, we started a movie company with a couple of kids that work with me. It's sort of crazy to do that. And there's also a game for kids there, but I don't separate them. And I really think that our period in history is a period where we need to bring things together. Since the Renaissance, we've understood the world by separating it, putting things in boxes. Then we understood them. If an artist worked in a certain way, if he was simple, you could understand it. If he was complex, you couldn't. So
you're a few feet over me now in your language, so you have a lot of assumptions about art, I think.
Okay.
And I must have my own assumptions about art, I know. And it's hard sometimes to make those two interact properly. So I want you to keep talking, because right now I'm lost.
That's good. One of the things I tell all the kids is, if you know where you're going, you're not going anywhere. And it's true. If you know, why do you want to go there? You've been there. It's...
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't been there.
Oh, yeah. You haven't been everywhere, but...
No, but you and I, if I had the chance to have lunch with you every day, I think I'd feel I'd benefit, and I would be able not to be shy like I am now, but I would be involved with you. So you're very complex.
I think I'm simple. Ask Ann.
Yeah, well, I think...
I wonder if I could ask a question in that spirit. How'd you get where you are? Who was one of the biggest influences on you as you were shaping to be who you are now? James?
Well, I've had a magic life. I mean, I don't know why, but I've really had amazing things happen. And I can't tell you all of it. Ann told me not to say this, but I think the reason I am where I am is because I couldn't spell. And so I had to find a thing that I could do. And I happened to live in quite a bit, grew up in places that were in nature. I think that was, I could understand nature, I couldn't understand grown-ups. And I also, you found art. I could do that and my parents couldn't. And I think the two of them is really why we started the foundation, is because I wanted to bring the two together. And I haven't told Marianne Gerda she's here. She's our director of the foundation. But I like to change the thing. The foundation should be about nature, art, and bridging to the human. It's really that thing that my whole life's been about, and I think that's why I was interested in talking to you.
Thank you.
Because we confuse each other.
And to confuse each other is wonderful.
It's wonderful.
It makes you think.
And Arnie, how did you get to where you are today? What was the path? What was a major influence? Something along this line.
What?
For Arnie. Same question to Arnie.
Well, I used to go away in the summer times to Bar Harbor, Maine. There was a laboratory that I worked in, and it was lonely. And I had a wonderful cottage on the beach and the ocean, and it was lonely. And I wrote home to my sisters, who always listened to me. I said, send me some paper and watercolors. And I was not lonely when I had the papers and watercolors. I could paint the ocean, I could paint what was in my head, and there was no effort involved. So that's how I have gotten this far.
Okay. What was your first medium in terms of artistic expression?
Well, I was into horses, so I drew them all the time. Well, I couldn't get enough pictures, so I started drawing and I started painting, and then I was in the Army, and I thought I was in Korea, and I thought I would go to school, and the painting department at Cranbrook was filled, so I had to take sculpture. And then
And the rest is history.
then Ann and I wanted to build our own home, so I got into architecture. And then I was working at a Unitarian church, and they did a big fountain, and I wanted to tile the floor, but they didn't have enough money. So I trained 5 of the ladies to tile, so I got into community work. Life's led me to where I am. I do think that one of the main things is to trust life. When we build these parks with these kids, you're laying a row of bricks, and you want to be sure your row is right, but you also want the guy next to you to do his row right. So you have to trust him. You have to trust so that the whole thing is going to come out all right. And if you can trust life, then everything works. It doesn't work the way you want it to, because by trust doesn't mean that you get what you want. It means you trust whatever comes, and you work with that part. Because that's all you can work with.
It's a very upbeat perspective.
What?
Very upbeat perspective.
No, it's not upbeat, it's practical.
Arnie, any response to that?
Well, I paint till I get tired and I go to sleep. And when I wake up, I say, I did this. And it's a wonderful thing that there are several levels of consciousness that work with creativity. And the best one I like is going to sleep.
Now, I wonder if we could be prophetic for just a moment and ask each of you to espouse one wisdom that you would deliver to the young people. Is there one piece of advice or one wisdom that you would prefer to a young person just starting out? James? Can I put
Trust
you on?
life.
Huh?
Trust life.
One more, a little louder.
Trust life.
Trust life. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to expound on that, or basically what you were saying before?
Well, when I use the term trust, I don't use it as a hope or you have to do something. It's a verb. You trust life and then you go out and do it. You know, get up and do the dumb thing.
Okay. Arnie, do you have a wisdom that you would share?
Yeah, in the sense that how do we begin to be artists? And in New York City, you ride the subways a lot. When I used to have to go to school and back, and it was an hour each way. And I found that I needed to get a pencil to make sketches. And it's something that I now have saved. And so it filled my life. Making a sketch filled my life with joy. Whereas sitting in the train and watching all my neighbors, some of them who could mug me and take my wallet, you know, it wasn't fun at all.
Any advice, Arnie, that you would give to a young person starting out, facing a career with some art or in art?
I like the idea of everybody, all people, getting a pad of paper, having a pencil attached to it, and you know, carry that with you. And when you walk, wherever you walk, it'll grab you. You want to draw something, and that's something we don't do. You don't have a pad with you now, do you? Yeah, you're all set. Yeah.
This is what it shrinks down to sometimes.
Yeah.
On a different note, what do you think should be the role of art in society? Is that a fair question?
I don't think they should be separated. I mean, I think, you know, I keep going back to this thing, but at one point I was with a guy and we were going to do a park in between the border, and we got in a conversation that walls connect as well as they divide. Like, you know, we all have skin, and it's a membrane, and it's not a wall because the air affects it, water, I think we have to, and I think the biggest thing for young people to do is learn more than one discipline. You know, like we thought of, these kids and I thought of a game, and one of them was, well, if you move from one corner to another corner in a room, do things change? Just try it. I mean, you're a neurologist, you're in that corner. Go in that corner and be a dentist. The world changes. Or
No, I'm not good with my fingers.
Or you're a Republican, go in that corner and be a socialist.
Well,
Try it.
that you could do.
And we go in these corners and we defend them as if the world would end without them.
Do you think you're in a? I'm sensing that you think you're in a. You get cornered in life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've always had the opportunity not to be cornered.
Well, all you have to do is move to the other corner.
No, you have to run fast in New York City, and you're never going to be cornered. And life is if you're a speedy runner, life is safe.
Arnie, what do you think should be the role of art in society?
I think it's essential. I think it needs to be done by people before they go to school, during school. They need to do it on the subways as they're going home. Art is the most it's so Freudian. You know, you're painting your soul, what's in your soul. And you don't know what you're painting, and that's why sometimes doing it on the subway is great, because there's no landscape. You have to look inside your head.
So how do you keep it from getting rote and routine and boring? How do you keep at it as an essential thing, but keep it fresh and motivating?
Let me answer the question you asked Ernie.
Okay.
Can you say it again?
What do you think should be the role of art in society?
Well, it goes back to the saying of the scientist and the artist. I think the scientist looks for answers and creates mysteries. The artist celebrates mysteries and creates more mysteries. When you a piece of art, you know, like we never know where we are.
When you're doing art.
What?
When
we
you
think we do.
Yeah, but we don't know.
But we don't know why we're doing things. And I think you need both of them. You need the people that can try to understand life. You need the people that can celebrate it. And without the celebration, it's not worth living, you know. And I was very cautious when I first met Ernie, because he sort of was a threat to the artist. You know, for the artist, it's sort of amazing thing to do something, to have an idea, and then get the chance to see it come about and make it real. You know, something that's so elusive that you can do it and you can make it real, and it's magic. And so I was very cautious when he started asking me, what's creativity? And I don't know what it is.
Do you know when you are creative?
Sometimes I don't know till later.
Till
I'll
later.
do something and I'll think it's not good or it's not beautiful. I'll come back 4 or 5 years later and it is. And often the art leads me to somewhere. The other thing that happens, you know, like I'm doing a model of a building, and I do something with my hands, and then I say, well, that's what I was looking for. So I don't think the mind is just here. I think we think with the whole body, possibly more than that. There aren't these lines between everything that we're so used to dealing with.
Arnie, you're a neurologist. What do you think of the notion of thinking with your whole body?
It's hard enough to think with your brain.
Amen.
Yeah, so I don't think you can separate where thinking is taking place. If you watch people at a baseball game, they're you know, the people who are sitting in the seats, they're moving, you know, as if the ball is coming at them, and if you say to them, what are you moving for? I'm not moving. So I think it's automatic, and I think art is part of that automaticity. Yeah, and children, if you watch a child, and there's pencils around and paper, they automatically go get the paper and they'll do things. But if they get a little older and you say, why don't you do some drawing? They say, huh? Are your kids like that?
We've had some phases.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's touch on memory. Some would say that as an artist develops and they get better, that there's a memory component involved. Would you care to comment on the role of memory in the development of art?
One of the things that I have found, like when we do the life class, I met him in our life drawing class.
Yeah.
And when we do it, we do sketches really fast. You know, half-minute sketches, 1-minute sketches, 2-minute sketches, 5, and then 10 minutes, and then I do watercolors. But if I didn't do the repetition, if I didn't do it's that thing of doing it, you know, regularly, like breathing. It'd be hard to be alive if you didn't breathe. If you do what you love, you know, like a pianist, he'll do all these scales. It's to get the stuff to move inside of him. You know, when I first started to paint, I would sweep the floor, and I'd get me in now I knew my mind was on painting. And, you know, it's the way the doctor will, in the old movies, will take his glasses off and clean them. It was that thing where he went inside and said, not what do all these add up to, but what do they feel like? What's there that I'm not, how do I understand it? And I think that's what we should be teaching our kids how to do, how to go inside and find out where the secrets are.
Tell us about your thoughts on these things.
I'm just a tool tonight.
No, well, you're a tool other times. Tell us your thoughts.
I like that. I think good science comes from stopping to do art. Good art, I would imagine, comes from pausing the science. Two sides of the brain, the two sides of the consciousness. I like what I'm hearing. I like the purpose of it. I think art should be required. Even after you're a professor, you should have to stop and take recess and take your hour of art and so forth. You know, so much of our society emphasizes the logic part, the left brain part, the writing, the analysis. And it's a shame that our society has not put higher value on art, even, as MGM says, art for art's sake, you know. Those are some thoughts.
But you see neurological patients and you ask them to draw things, don't you?
At times, yeah.
Yeah. And why do we do that?
It's a window into the brain's gears that
That's right.
cannot necessarily be accessed by speech, even by the person.
So, and do we ever sit down and draw draw from our brain rather than looking at the object?
That's interesting. You know, it depends on what side of the patient's brain you're trying to probe. But there's a famous study where they took a person who was ignoring the left side of the world, and they said to him, draw the central piazza in Bologna. And he only drew the right half. And they said, now imagine you went all the way to the other side and you looked out and you only do the other half. Right? And that's all just from memory. So it depends. Or perhaps you showed them something and now say, copy it. Those would be a different set of circuits that you're trying to probe. But the drawing can tell us so much. We don't so much get into art or creativity, though. We're very busy measuring weakness and blind spots and next, you know.
You mean neurologist?
Yeah.
Yeah. What if you're not a neurologist?
You should have gone to med school. Why would you not be a neurologist?
You went to med school because your mother told you to go to
Yeah,
med
that's right.
school.
Life begins
Yeah.
at the medical school
No, but
graduation.
there's this other world out there that neurologists don't understand.
My neighbor is an English professor, and we were just having this discussion the other night And I put it this way, the job as a neurologist is like a car mechanic. We look at the brain, we check on the circuits, we prescribe or shock or treat, whatever we can. But an English professor and an artist, that's what the machine does. We're just the mechanics here. That's the elevated output of the brain. The purpose of the brain is not to touch my nose and his finger. The purpose of the brain is to create and to invent. And so creativity is a manifestation of the arts. Science is its own rightful pursuit, but for society, it's important to have the creativity, which is what the machine produces.
I put it that logic can take you somewhere, but dreams can tell you where to go.
Yeah, like that.
And if you only have a culture that is using the logical part, that part of the brain, it doesn't know where it's going.
Is that a cue, or you're hyperkinetic? Okay, fire away. Ready for some questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the first question. Some people say you are born creative or not. In your opinion, can you learn creativity? If so, how?
By watching. So,
I couldn't hear.
as a kid growing up in New York, I would see people
Some
with a
people say
sketchbook,
you are born
and I would
creative or not.
sneak up behind them and watch them because it was fascinating.
Can
And
creativity?
then I would try to do it when I went home.
If so,
You know, but I think it's being a copycat. And art classes, in a way, are ways of teaching people to be copycats and draw and paint.
What do you think? Can you create an artist, or does it have to be born?
I think everybody has creativity in them. I think the person that becomes an artist, there's probably more things that, I think the first thing is that they're so miserable they have to do something. Or they're so bored they have to do something. Or they're so curious that they have to do something. But yeah, and like kids that don't fit in, I tell them that they're gifted because they don't fit in. They can find themselves quicker. Most people take till they're 50 or 60 to have a mid-year crisis. I think we should have one every 2 or 3 years. And I think creativity, I think the human being is geared to be creative because we had to exist in those ancient times so we didn't get eaten by somebody else. You know, but I think the contemporary world is too tied to trying to understand everything. I'm in the wrong place.
Well, too tired to understand everything? But if you're too tired, you just need to understand a little bit.
You only can understand a little bit. Maybe.
Yeah, then you work your way up to everything.
We have 4 questions, and I know we're running out of time, so I hope you don't mind. Try to do this quickly. So how do you know you're creative? Are there any benchmarks?
How do you?
You can say no.
It's when I print money I know I'm creative.
Good answer.
I don't think that question arises in me when I do paintings. I'm not saying, am I creative or not?
I actually think that the most dangerous person for an artist is the people that like his work. Because the person that doesn't like his work, well, the person that, if they like your work, you try to make them happy and do something like it again. Person that doesn't like your work, you can just say, oh, he's dumb. He does it very smart. So you can write him off, but you can't write off the person that says you're great.
And that's dangerous?
What?
And you think that's dangerous? Or
Yeah.
how is it dangerous to not be able to write off a praiser?
Well, because the temptation is, it's like when people get too famous very young, then they keep doing the same thing the rest of their life because it makes everybody happy. And I don't think if you're an artist, you're not there to make people happy. You're there to find the truth.
Good
Next
one.
question. So this is kind of a comment, but I'll read it. I think both of you are national treasures. Hear, hear. And I hope you live forever. But the question is, what is still on your bucket list? And what do you want written on your tombstone? Let's stick to the first one, because I think that's interesting. James, what do you still have on your bucket list?
Your bucket list.
What have you got on your bucket list?
Your unfulfilled goals. What's some of your biggest still to-dos on the to-do list?
Not to do anything really dumb tomorrow.
You're a safe bet.
No, I'm not.
Wow.
Any projects, any goals, any long-term things you'd like to really see come together yet? It's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
Arnie, do you want to jump in?
Be calm.
Okay. How close are you on that one?
I'm almost there.
Okay. To follow up on the latter half of our other question, if you could be remembered for one main thing, can you imagine what that would be, or is that a fair question?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
Okay.
I think I'd like to be remembered for auditory neuropathy.
Auditory neuropathy.
For what?
I found some patients who I was able to localize the lesion to the auditory nerve, and I called it auditory neuropathy, and they found so many now, and it really affects comprehension, and you can correct it.
Created this field. Anything that you'd like to be remembered for was sort of the other question?
I think it's the people that have enjoyed my work.
I just want to underscore that an artist just said he doesn't want to be remembered for his art, he wants to be remembered for the people that it affected. That's going to stick with me.
That's great. Quick one for Arnie.
Yeah.
Do you draw neuroscapes from memory?
Yes.
Perfect.
Having looked at slices of the brain, ever since high school, I think. And I love the colors, the stains, and so that when I have nothing to do, I make a sketch of something I'm not looking at, except in here.
So I know we have some great questions, but we are running way over time, so I'm going to give one last one to everyone at the stage there. Could you create art in the absence of love? Can you create art in the absence of love?
Actually, I was thinking about that. And I don't know how you do it, but I kind of think that that art and fear are very tied to each other. And I think somehow the culture has to learn. I think fear is our biggest enemy. We're trained, when we were prehistoric, we'd either get eaten by the animals or our kids would starve, so we started fighting with the neighbors so we could have their food. And I think fear is such a big thing. I think it's what makes people want to have all this money, or that makes people want to hate each other. And I think somehow the culture has to come to terms with it. Fear and love are brought together. And that somehow we've got to make peace within ourselves. I don't know if it's true, but that's what I've been thinking.
Prophetic. Arnie, do you think you need love to make art?
I was thinking, I think if love is not essential, because love is so emotional. You have to feel emotional about something that you're going to sketch. I don't think you need to have that to draw and paint. You may need it to walk, but not to paint. What do you think?
Some of my strongest poems come from positions of pain. So love art is different from hurt art, but it's all art.
Well, I think that concludes our conversation, and thank you all very much.